everyone, I'm Julie Nelson. Thanks for joining us on KARE 11 Plus on this big night for our country. We will be streaming nonstop throughout the night, so we hope you'll stick around. With the 7 o'clock hour now here, another round of polls have closed, and this is a big one. Polls just closed in 21 states and Washington, D.C. Between them all, 171 electoral votes up for grabs. Two of those states are being watched very closely, Michigan and Pennsylvania, both key battleground states. Here in Minnesota and Wisconsin, you still have an hour to get out and vote. Our polls close at 8, and as long as you're in line by 8, you can vote. Helping us out with our coverage tonight is an entire team of reporters at parties and rallies across the metro and in Washington, D.C. We will be checking in with them throughout the evening. We'll also be checking in with Rena and Chris throughout the night. They are both joining us in studio as we break down what's happening across the country and here at home. And we are so grateful to have GOP strategist Brian McClung in-house tonight, as well as Democratic strategist Jeff Hayden. Thanks so much for being here, you guys.
Happy to be back.
You always offer such invaluable insight and in the most civil and intelligent way. So we're really lucky to have you both here tonight offering your analysis. We appreciate it. Let's get right to it. This map shows the 7 key swing states that are being watched like a hawk tonight because they could ultimately decide the presidential election. Those swing states are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and our neighbor, Wisconsin. Our Morgan Wolf is in Madison, Wisconsin right now. We want to check in with her. About an hour there until polls close. A little drama there tonight in Wisconsin, yes. Morgan.
A little bit of drama. You know what, Julie? Actually, right about now, the Wisconsin Election Commission is starting a press conference, and so they are going to be giving us an update. In Milwaukee, we need to talk about what happened there. 30,000 absentee ballots had to be recounted, and this is all because of some type of, security error that they had with the machines. And so once the election officials got everything under control, they just said, all right, everything's looking fine, but we're going to recount them as a precaution. And so they are doing that right now. And I just want to remind people, it's going to be a long night, and it might have just gotten longer with that happening because Wisconsin is one of the 9 states that has a state law in place that does not allow election officials to count absentee ballots until election day. In Dane County, we just heard from their clerk and also the city of Madison's clerk that said everything's been really smooth for them. They haven't had any issues at all, and they didn't really see too many lines at their polling places too. And that might be because of the amount of early voting that Wisconsin saw. So there are roughly 3 million eligible voters, and about over 1.5 million voted early. We're talking about absentees and in-person voting early, which closed actually on Sunday. And so we're going to check in with the Wisconsin Election Commission, hear what's going on in Milwaukee County. That is, of course, one of the biggest areas that we're going to be keeping our eyes on. Dane County is big too, but Milwaukee really carries most of the population. We're going to check in with those officials, and I'll get back to you.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Morgan. Well, just last week, Wisconsin, like Minnesota, did test its election equipment and invited the public to watch the process. 108 machines were tested and placed across Madison alone. After several rounds of testing, the election equipment was locked up and securely stored for today's voting. Every vote in Wisconsin will be critical tonight. Polls continue to show the race with Harris and Trump locked in a virtual tie. Danny Spiewak made a trip to western Wisconsin to check in with voters there.
Across the river in Hudson, early voting has been underway for a few weeks.
I think we're ready for a change.
Matthew Barris voted for former President Trump.
I don't agree with everything there, but I don't agree with anything on the other side.
Because he says his life was better under him.
Yeah, I was making $19 an hour and I wasn't struggling. Now I'm making more than that and I'm struggling. So that's not easy.
Trump has dominated St. Croix County the last 2 election cycles, winning here by 15 points or more each time.
I'm horrified, to be honest.
Western Wisconsin native Carol Struve, who's visiting from New York, said she's surprised by the amount of Trump signs.
And I'm like, no, they're not going to win the election. You come here, it's like, oh my gosh.
She's voting for Vice President Harris.
Turning the page, we're not going back. The women's thing, oh my goodness. Women's rights, freedom, choice, and I believe she'll do that.
Despite Trump's popularity in parts of western Wisconsin, the state as a whole is one of the nation's most competitive. In 2016, Trump beat Hillary Clinton by just 23,000 votes in Wisconsin. Then in 2020, lost to President Biden by a similar margin.
As of now, it looks like it could be that close.
Neil Krause teaches political science at UW River Falls.
For the Dems, it's going to come down a lot to turnout in Milwaukee and Madison. These are the two big cities. For the Republicans, it's going to be what happens in small towns. And then, you have a lot of suburbs, though, where it's contested.
Last week, both campaigns sent their vice presidential candidates to the Milwaukee suburbs. Governor Walz went to Waukesha.
It's a privilege to be with you here.
While Senator Vance went to Racine.
Thank you.
What happens in Wisconsin may help tip the Electoral College.
I think about every swing state being a huge important factor in it all.
So am I hopeful? I want to be.
All right, we have a lot going on here in Minnesota, but we've been talking about Wisconsin. So, gentlemen, let's start there. The last poll I saw for Tammy Baldwin and Eric Hovde, of course, their Senate seat, up for grabs. Tammy Baldwin trying to hold on. The last poll I saw said 48 to 48.
Yeah.
Super tight. What are your feelings, thoughts, sources saying going into tonight?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tight. I think we started seeing like the ads even in our media market, which meant that Western Wisconsin was really there. I think it was kind of the classic, conversation of an incumbent that was tied to the last recession or the last bout. It wasn't a recession, but all of the inflation and things that were going on, and kind of tied to an insider and a fresh new face that was a business person that cared about people. Obviously, that messaging was working because the polls are tight.
So when this became tighter and tighter and tighter, was it a surprise, the Democratic Party, or was the party anticipating this might be a tight race?
I think that they were anticipating it only because, Wisconsin is much like Minnesota, and even though we had the trifecta, it's a lot closer than what it actually looks like. And Wisconsin's kind of a mirror. I know that people don't like to hear that, but they're kind of a mirror of Minnesota. So I think that they probably were a little surprised that it's as tight as it is because Tammy Baldwin was pretty popular, but it isn't surprising that it's tight.
So let's talk a little bit, Brian, about the money that was spent on that campaign. My understanding is that Hovde got a large surge in funding right at the end. Is that what you're hearing too? And if so, what does that mean?
He did, but he invested his own money first. And I think that's what you see as kind of a target for Republicans nationally as they recruit candidates, is they are looking for, self-made business people. Then you don't have a political record, you don't have that political baggage. You can come in and kind of present yourself as you'd want to, as somebody who's created jobs and made a difference. And so Eric Hovde invested a lot of his own money, millions of his own dollars in the race to begin with. And then once he got it close, then the funds come in from Mitch McConnell's PAC and from other sources. So yeah, that's for sure going to be a neck and neck race, but you do have to, I think, give the edge to Tammy Baldwin at the end. She has withstood a tough re-election before. She's running for her third term now. You have a Democratic governor in Wisconsin, so they've proven that they can win statewide there. But Wisconsin is sort of like our slightly more conservative cousin, right? And here we are getting less attention, even though our governor is on the ticket. All of the ads and the rallies are happening in Wisconsin. Now, I think probably for most Minnesotans, they're glad they get enough political ads and mailers and everything else as it is. But it is interesting to watch next door and to see. I think that Wisconsin could be the decisive state in the presidential election.
Wow.
So it's that important. Either Wisconsin or Michigan very well could be the tipping point state. And so, we'll see as polls close here in, 50 minutes or so, and we start to get numbers.
All right. It's an exciting night, that's for sure. Brian and Jeff are going to stay with us all night, so we'll keep touching base with them. But right now, let's send it over to Rena.
All right. Thank you, Julie. Of course, all eyes are on this presidential race, but there are some big elections happening right here in our own state, and we want to check in with our election night parties that are happening around the metro. Let's start with Lou Goose, who is live at the GOP election night headquarters. That's in Bloomington. Joe, Lou, it looks like you have an interview there. Joe Tayrab.
Yes, Joe Tayrab. He's the GOP candidate in Congressional District 2, running against Angie Craig. Thanks for joining us. He's given us a couple minutes of his time, then he's out the door to the next thing. So thanks for joining us, Joe. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. We're feeling really, really good about what's going to happen tonight. Trump seems to be doing pretty well here from the early returns out east, and so we're excited about what's going to happen here in the 2nd District.
Okay. Now, the last time, 2 years ago, when Angie Craig was in another closely contested election, you were still working at the U.S. Attorney's Office on some high-profile cases, the Feeding Our Future case and the gang cases that we've reported on. I'm curious, what made you want to leave that job to get into politics for this race?
Yeah, well, I loved that job. It was just an honor to get to work with law enforcement day in and day out to help hold criminals accountable. But ultimately, I felt like I had a higher calling to actually try to bring some common sense to Congress here, because right now we're just not getting that. When it comes to the economy, we had Angie Craig voting for these spending bills that led to more inflation. We had an open border that Angie Craig voted to keep open, and we're not backing law enforcement like we should. So I'm really excited about having gotten the race. It was a calling that I felt like I had to respond to.
And what kind of things did you hear from voters when you were campaigning? It was kind of a wild blitz for you, jumping into it and getting into what was sure to be a tight race, because that district always is. What kind of things did you hear from voters, the ones that told you that they'd be willing to vote for you, where in the past maybe they voted for Angie Craig?
Yeah, for sure. I think the border and immigration is the number one issue for a lot of people. It for sure is in the 2nd District. I mean, I remember talking to a waitress over in Prior Lake, and she said that no less than 10 people in her small community of friends and family had been affected by the fentanyl epidemic in terms of overdoses. It's just so sad and crushing to know that stuff is all coming through our southern border that's open right now. And sadly, we had politicians, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Angie Craig, who didn't do enough in time to secure the border. And people like me, federal prosecutors, had to work with law enforcement to actually hold those kind of criminals accountable who are dealing that poison on our streets. It's unacceptable, and so those are the kind of things that I heard from voters that I want to tackle day one in Congress.
Okay, well, good luck to you as the polls close and the results start to come in. Are you headed to a watch party or something now?
Yeah, we have a victory party. We're trying to speak that into existence here. But yeah, down in Lakeville, kind of heart of the 2nd District, I'm really excited to be meeting with supporters and friends and family down there.
All right, thanks a lot, Joe. Thanks for your time and good luck tonight.
Thanks, Lou. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so Rena, we're watching that race. We're also keeping a close eye on Congressional District 3, where Tad Jude is the Republican candidate, and party leaders have a lot of confidence and are telling us that's another one to watch. But for now, we'll throw it back to you and we'll check in just a little bit.
All right, Lou, thank you so much. And of course, Joe Tabor running against U.S. Representative Angie Craig for Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District, and that one is hotly contested, of course. Let's go across the river to St. Paul, where the Intercontinental Hotel, I should say, and that's where the DFL is gathered tonight, and that is where we find our Jennifer Hoff, who is covering everything there. Hey, Jennifer.
Hi, Rena. It would be nice if some folks showed up here to have to interview as well. We're still waiting on several people and key lawmakers here from the DFL as we sort of await polls close at 8 o'clock, of course, and that's when we're told that more folks will start to show up. You've heard us talk about Walz. You've heard us talk about Congressional District 3 in particular, state Senate race in District 45, because those all really have implications on the balance of power here in the state. But we do want to talk about Congressional District number 5. It is one of the races that may very well be one that we can call earlier than some of those other ones. And of course, Representative Ilhan Omar is in charge of that district right now. She's vying for her 4th term, but the district, of course, is heavily blue. The DFL has held it since the early 60s, so it's not really a surprise there. But she has made several controversial comments and has views on Israel that could potentially really impact some of those uncommitted voters that we're hearing about all across the country. She also handedly beat Don Samuels in the primaries, you might remember, but she really struggled a couple years before that. So the Republican that she's running against is Dalia Al-Akidi. She is from Iraq. She also lived in Lebanon when Saddam Hussein was in power, but she was actually deported from there after opposing terrorist persecution of Christians. She's also a longtime journalist who says that she handedly supports Israel, supports school choice, and she also wants to ensure energy independence. So just another race that we are watching here. It's unclear if Representative Omar will show up here and what other lawmakers potentially will, but we are expecting several key folks to show up here, especially, again, as I mentioned, after the polls close at 8 o'clock. Back to you guys.
Well, I certainly hope someone shows up, just because it seems like you need some energy, right? You need someone to talk to. Great job anyway, Jennifer. Thank you.
Nobody wants to listen. Nobody wants to listen to me the whole time, but yeah.
Oh, well, we'll listen to you anytime. We'll come back to you in a little bit. Thanks, Jennifer. All right, let's take a live look right now. This is the Trump-Vance campaign night headquarters at the Palm Beach Convention Center. People are starting to fill in there. As we understand it, Trump is actually at Mar-a-Lago currently, but will show up at this party as they are awaiting results right now. Let's head to Washington, D.C. Our Lauren Lemanchek live at Howard University, where the Harris Walls, I should say, campaign is gathered tonight. And this is kind of a big deal for our state simply because it is our governor on the ticket.
Yeah, it is, Rena. I mean, this is going to be a consequential, historic election for the country, no matter how you slice it. But if Harris and Walz win, of course, that's extra consequential for Minnesota because we will have a change in our state house as well. Now, we're here at Howard University where the energy has picked up really incredibly over the last hour or so. The music started, they cut it literally as you were coming to me, but people are dancing. They got about 20,000 people here. You can't see them necessarily from where we're standing just because we're on this riser with media from all across the world. And so now they're starting to introduce people who are a part of the entertainment for tonight. We have seen them warming up. Now, I've been talking to folks who are close to Governor Walz. Oh, I'm going to stop talking and step aside. They're singing the national anthem right now. So I'm going to let you listen in to that.
Whose bright stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red there, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say
We're listening in there at Howard University to a beautiful rendition of the national anthem. If nothing else, certainly a patriotic day today, no matter the outcome of the election. Well, it's been a frequently asked question ever since Governor Tim Walz was named Harris's running mate in August. What happens here in Minnesota if they win? Take a look. If he and Vice President Harris are defeated today, Walz will remain governor, serving out the remainder of his term until January of 2027. He could then run for re-election in 2026. If Harris and Walz win, he will have to resign the governor position before the inauguration on January 20th, 2025. Also, if Walz and Harris win the election, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan automatically becomes governor. She would be the first woman ever to serve as governor in Minnesota's history, and the first Native American woman to serve as governor in the U.S. Minnesota President Bobby Joe Champion would take over as lieutenant governor and would be the state's first black lieutenant governor. Win or lose, a lot of pride tonight in Mankato, where Governor Walz lived and taught for years. Sammy Selena is live there tonight. Hey, Sammy.
Hey, and just in a few minutes, or the past few minutes, I should say, folks have been starting to filter into the venue here in Mankato. It's, of course, a DFL event, and folks describe the mood as optimistic, but admit they're a little nervous to see what happens. Of course, there are some of Walz's former students here who have been with him since 2006 when his political career began. They started off door knocking, trying to get him into CD1. That was a seat that was held by a Republican for 12 years before 2006 when he finally claimed that. And of course, he served as a representative for 12 years after that. Now, alumni say that they are certainly hopeful for tonight. Again, a little bit nervous. Now, Leah Hansen, who chairs State Senate District 18, the DFL chair, put together this event. Here is how she is feeling. Here is how Mankato is feeling from her perspective tonight.
Yeah, folks are excited. There has been a ton of energy with all of our events. We have Mankato West alumni for Walz showing up, coming out of the woodwork. for all of our events. And yeah, I think it's really exciting, one, to think about having a third vice president from Minnesota in the first place, and then thinking from, small town Mankato, former high school teacher, football coach. I think people are really excited about the possibility of that.
We will hear more from Mankato West for Walz a little bit later in the night. Of course, Walz has a long history. He moved to Mankato in '96. Him and Gwen Walz, they of course were educators at Mankato West in 1999. Walz was on the coaching team that led that team to a state football championship. He was also a faculty advisor for the Gay Straight Alliance starting in 1999. We'll hear more about that history and more from his former students tonight here in Mankato. For now, I'll take it back to you.
All right, Sammy, we'll check back. Thanks so much. Let's head back now to Howard University in Washington, D.C., where Lauren Lemanchek is standing by as they will eventually be gathering to watch these results roll in. Hey, Lauren.
Hi, Julie. Yeah, there's already quite a crowd gathered here, about 20,000 people expected here tonight. Right now, you may be able to hear behind me the Howard University Gospel Choir is singing for the crowd. Of course, we stopped just a moment ago talking because the national anthem was sung, and we wanted to be respectful for that. But it's also so stirring on a night like tonight, election night, when we're all exercising our right to vote, to hear the national anthem. Now, I do want to say I've been in touch with Governor Walz's spokesperson today. He tells me the governor is feeling grateful for this extraordinary opportunity and is excited for tonight. We know that Governor Walz is watching returns come in with his wife Gwen, his kids, Gus and Hope. They are off-site right now. And we're also told that there is a great deal of extended family who has come here to Washington, D.C. to be with him tonight. At some point, he and Vice President Harris will make their way here to Howard University to address this crowd. I know they're prepared for it to be quite a long night, but the crowd here is anxious to see them. A lot of excitement. And I have to tell you, we're here on Howard University, which is Vice President Harris's alma mater, and about half of the students I saw walking around campus today were wearing Kamala Harris t-shirts. So the excitement was palpable here on this campus. I also want to tell you some things I'm learning from the campaign. One, Governor Walz, for instance, was doing radio hits in key swing states right up through the evening drive today because they were trying to turn out all of those voters. And what we're hearing from the campaign tonight is that they are excited about the turnout that they're seeing in Philadelphia, which is a key for them. The campaign kind of knows the math gets pretty hard if they don't do well in Pennsylvania tonight. They're also seeing long lines, they say, and great turnout in college towns and are near campuses in these swing states. And kind of an interesting fact, because there are long lines, they're trying to get celebrities there to help keep those students and the people near them in line. In one case, Paul Rudd, the famous actor, is in Pennsylvania visiting. The polls have closed in Pennsylvania, but was visiting with college students to make sure that they stayed in line. So they know this will be won by a few votes in a few precincts. And we don't know what time Governor Walz and his family are going to show up here at Howard University tonight, but of course, we will be here when they do. Julie and Rena?
All right, Lauren, thanks so much. Wow, lots of races and states to be watching nationally, but there's a lot that could change here in Minnesota as well at the state capitol. Our chief political reporter, John Croman, walks us through the legislative balance of power and the impact of this election.
So the landscape for this election? Well, the governor's office will remain in the blue camp, regardless of what happens in this election. But the House and Senate are up for grabs, and presidential polling is no predictor.
There is a long-standing tradition in America and Minnesota of people splitting their ticket. They might vote for, let's say, Harris for president, and then turn around and vote for a Republican for the Minnesota House.
In the House, Democrats had a 70 to 64 seat majority the past 2 years. Republicans only need to flip 4 seats to gain a 68 to 66 majority. If Republicans pick up 3 seats, we end up with a 67 to 67 even split, which would require a power sharing arrangement, which is what happened here in 1979.
One of the big puzzles in Minnesota is that we keep seeing Democrats winning statewide races, while Republicans have done very well in the legislative races. And the answer to that puzzle is that Republicans are distributed more evenly in the state.
All 134 House seats are on the ballot Tuesday, but there are 15 matchups we're watching most closely. District 3B near Duluth, incumbent Republican Natalie Delesnikar versus Democrat Mark Munker. District 7B in the Iron Range, Democrat Lori Janatopoulos faces Carl Warwas in an open seat created by the retirement of Dave Lislegard. District 14A in St. Cloud, incumbent Republican Bernie Perriman is being challenged by Democrat Abdi Desani. District 14B next door, incumbent Democrat Dan Wolgamott faces a challenge from Sue Eck. District 18A in southern Minnesota, incumbent Democrat Jeff Brandt is being challenged by Republican Erica Schwartz. District 26A in Winona, Democrat Sarah Kruger is going up against Republican Aaron Rapinski for a seat left open by the retirement of Gene Pawlowski. Here in the Twin Cities Metro, even more swing districts in play. 32B in Blaine, incumbent Democrat Matt Norris is being challenged by Republican Alex Moe. District 35A in Anoka, it's incumbent Democrat Zach Stevenson against Republican Josh Jungling. District 35B in Coon Rapids, Democrat Carrie Rayrauer is taking on Republican Steve Pape in an open seat caused by the retirement of Democrat Jerry Newton. District 36A in Lino Lakes, Republican incumbent Elliot Ingen faces a challenge from Democrat Janelle Calhoun. District 41A in Lake Elmo, Democrat Lucia Robleski is running against Republican Wayne Johnson for an open seat caused by the retirement of GOP Rep. Mark Weems. District 41B in Hastings, Democrat Jen Fox faces Republican Tom Tipple in a race for an open seat caused by Republican Shane Hudella's retirement. District 48B in Chaska, Democrat incumbent Lucy Rame is being challenged by Republican Caleb Steffenhagen. District 54A in Shakopee, incumbent Democrat Brad Tapke facing Republican challenger Aaron Paul. And in Lakeville's District 57B, Democrat Brian Cohen is taking on incumbent Republican Jeff Whitty. Over in the Senate, 66 of 67 seats are not in play this year because senators are in the middle of four-year terms. But right now, that body is split 33 to 33 because Democrat Kelly Morrison resigned to run for Congress. So control of the Senate will be decided by a special election for Morrison's seat in Senate District 45, a race that pits Democrat Ann Johnson Stewart against Republican Kathleen Folk.
We need to find ways to make sure the families can afford their life here, and hopefully their grandparents stay here too and they don't move to another state as well.
Folk is a realtor who is campaigning on the idea of restoring balance to state government. Stewart is a civil engineer and former state senator.
Having served in the Senate, I realized how to be effective, and I worked with some other colleagues to form the Infrastructure Alliance.
SD 45 takes in all of the cities around Lake Minnetonka and parts of western Edina. It has been held by both Democrats and Republicans in the past, making it a true swing district.
A lot going on, as we said, nationally, but also here at home. Let's start with what seats, Brian, you think the Republicans have the best chance of winning tonight.
Yeah, well, I think it really is rural Minnesota and the North Metro. So there are 4 remaining DFL House members from rural Minnesota. There's an Iron Range seat that's open. There's a seat in St. Cloud. There's a seat in the St. Peter area, and then there's a seat in Winona. And Republicans have to pick up a net of 4 seats. So if they held all of their current members and won those 4, they'd be back in the majority. The other area to look is in Anoka County in the North Metro. So you have an open seat where Representative Jerry Newton had served in Coon Rapids. Next door, Representative Zach Stevenson is a Democrat who's running for re-election, and then Democrat Matt Norris next to him. And Republicans that I've talked to have said the polling in those North Metro districts shows Trump ahead just slightly. So if the Republicans can keep up with that or outpace that, then they're in a good position. So ultimately, it is really about how close is the presidential race. If it's relatively close, Republicans will be in good shape. If it's a blowout for Harris in Minnesota, it's going to be hard to overcome that momentum.
But you said Republicans tend to do that more than Democrats?
You know, right now in the state legislature, there are more Republicans in seats that Joe Biden won than Democrats in seats that Donald Trump won. So Republicans in Minnesota do tend to outperform the top of the ticket. But, you know, it's possible to overcome a, 3 or 4 or 5 point disadvantage, get enough people to, ticket split to get you elected. It's very hard to overcome a 7, 8, 9, 10% disadvantage. So that's some of what I think people should be looking for here tonight.
All right, really watching that top of the ticket closely. Let's talk about that special election for the seat in the Senate tonight. What are your thoughts on that seat?
Well, I think it's a seat that had traditionally been Republican and started turning blue. And when it went blue, it went fast. So the last person to hold the seat is former state senator now who's vying for Congress, Kelly Morrison. She's going for Dean Phillips' seat, and that's kind of been a lot of
One we're
hoopla
watching
there.
very closely.
However, she won by like 12 or 15 points. She's a OBGYN, an active physician that's been a leader, not just in Minnesota, but across the nation on women's reproductive health, which we know was a main campaign issue throughout. Ann Johnson Stewart served well. She's a former civil engineer. She'll let you know that when you talk to her. And she just got redistricted out. So it wasn't that she lost an election. She was an active member of the Senate. So they're all running together. One person we haven't mentioned yet is Amy Klobuchar, who looks like she is going to win pretty big again. Doesn't look like Royce White has mounted really a big campaign. So she's been active in places like Senate District 45, helping to solidify the base. So one side of it is very, very red. The other side is getting close to 50-50. So I think Ann Johnson Stewart's going to win there.
All right, gentlemen, we appreciate it. We're going to check back in with Brian and Jeff in just a minute, but right now, let's send it over to Chris and the big board. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Julie, we got some more results. Jake, if we can go full here, I want to show everybody what's happening nationally. Donald Trump now has 101 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 49. A couple more states just called for Trump here. We're talking Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Oklahoma. These are states he won back in 2020. Tennessee, Kentucky, South Carolina was just called. He got that state as well. There are actually four that we're looking tight at, according to Brian and Jeff here. We're looking at Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, and Michigan. These are all super important states. Let's start with Georgia. Biden won Georgia by 12,000 votes in 2020. Right now, with 52% voting in, Trump has a resounding lead of 11 points in Georgia. We're still waiting for votes in Columbus, the suburban counties around Atlanta, and Savannah as well. But Trump has the lead in Georgia. That might tell you something with half the votes in. North Carolina, Trump won by 1% in 2020. Let's look now. 14%. This just updated a second ago. This is neck and neck, literally. 49.5% Donald Trump, 49.5% Kamala Harris. North Carolina is a big one. A lot of votes to come in here as well. I want to show you Ohio, though, for a second. Ohio is one where Trump won by 8%. He is right now, just updated. He's up about 1.5%, almost 2% right now in Ohio. But when we talk about how the electorate is split regionally, look at this. These are the results from 2020. That's America right now. Biden won Cleveland, Akron, Columbus, Dayton, Cincinnati, and Toledo. Everything else, except for this county, went to Donald Trump. Finally, let's check in with the other state that we want to key in on, which is Michigan. Brian, you were saying that Michigan is an absolute key to this. It might be the key to winning the presidency. Right now, we're only talking 5% of the votes in, but Kamala Harris has a 17-point lead. That's because a lot of the votes are coming in around Detroit. This is Oakland County, just northwest of Detroit. But that's the battleground in Michigan right now. Harris with a big lead here. We're still waiting. Obviously, Wisconsin and Minnesota, we got a little under a half an hour until the polls close there. We're going to be keying in on those as well. But right now, last check, 101 to 52, as we are about a third of the way into this race. Rena?
Democrats and Republicans are battling for more than just the White House this November. They're also seeking control of the House of Representatives. Republicans hold control right now by a slim margin, but all 435 seats are being contested, and pollsters estimate 43 of them are truly up for grabs. In addition to passing legislation, the party that wins the majority gets to run committees, which can hold hearings and order people to testify or provide documents. The majority also picks the Speaker of the House, whose powers include deciding which bills get voted on. And the House can introduce and pass articles of impeachment.
Well, control of the U.S. Senate is also up for grabs. Right now, Democrats hold a narrow majority, but deepening polarization, of course, is threatening some Democratic senators who have managed to hold on to red state seats. NBC's Alice Barr explains.
A year
to fentanyl that comes.
As Vice President Harris and former President Trump battle down to the wire, hotly contested congressional races are more quietly shaping the balance of power in Washington.
This is an election that you can't sit out.
Texas Representative Colin Allred challenging Senator Ted Cruz.
There has never been a starker choice.
In what could be Democrats' only chance to flip a Senate seat, the party's narrow two-seat majority is at risk, with competitive races for 8 Senate seats now held by Democrats, including bright red states like Montana, where Democratic incumbent John Tester has managed to hold on for 3 terms, 18 years.
Raised within 100 miles from where I was born.
But where former President Trump is widely popular.
We also voted to impeach Donald Trump twice.
And the partisan divide is now so wide that voters willing to stretch across to split their ticket may be vanishing.
When it's in the most extreme part of the swing, it somehow is difficult in a given moment to imagine that it can be different. And yet, of course, it can be different.
Longtime Senate staffer Martin Gold has closely watched the political pendulum swing.
I've been in Washington 60 years.
He points to a time when the parties were more internally fractured.
You had at that time major divisions within the party caucuses themselves. You had liberal Republicans, I worked for a couple of them, and you had conservative Republicans, and you had liberal Democrats and conservative Democrats. So party line voting was not common. You tended to get more cooperation across party lines.
One way to break through the partisan gridlock, change the Senate rules. For example, Vice President Harris recently backed suspending the 60-vote filibuster to restore federal abortion rights.
I think we need to take a look at the filibuster, to be honest with you.
That would bypass Republican objections, but
taking away the filibuster is a big accelerant to polarization.
So what can make a difference?
We feel these things at a very identity level.
George Washington University assistant professor Casey Burgett has this advice.
I always tell folks that if you are frustrated with politics, the worst thing you can do is step back from politics.
A critical reminder that leaders in Washington, in fact, are led by the voters and the power of the ballot. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
And of course, we want to check in on some of our local election night parties now happening all across the state. Danny Spiewak is live at the Intercontinental in St. Paul. That's where the DFL is holding its election night party. And Danny, are you seeing any of the congressional candidates show up yet, or is it just too soon?
Probably too soon. We're still waiting for the major power players in the DFL party to come to the Intercontinental tonight. We do know that DFL Chair Ken Martin has been here for several hours, and we are starting to see some more folks from the party that are trickling in. The bar is open now, so the people will likely follow. That's any party, and that is not a partisan issue. That usually gets the party going. So we are starting to see more activity. We do know that Senator Amy Klobuchar will be making an appearance tonight here in downtown St. Paul at this DFL watch party. We haven't talked a lot about her race right now. She is a heavy favorite, and she's won her last 2 elections by 60% or more of the vote. She's facing Republican challenger Royce White, who's been active in politics since the end of his NBA career. He's a Twin Cities native who is an ally of many in the Trump camp, including Steve Bannon. So he wasn't necessarily the first choice for the GOP in Minnesota, although he did eventually win their endorsement of the GOP here in the state. So Klobuchar, if she wins here tonight, this week, she will become the first senator in Minnesota history, first U.S. senator to serve 4 consecutive terms. So there's history on the line here for that. It'll be interesting to see what her margin looks like here. We spoke with DFL Chair Ken Martin earlier, and he thought that Klobuchar's popularity in the state is actually maybe potentially going to help them in some of the down ballot races. Obviously state House and Senate is up for grabs here, and that's very important to the state legislature. They're hoping that Klobuchar's presence on the ballot is going to help them in that, and then also the couple of very key U.S. Congressional races here, District 2 and 3, particularly in Minnesota, could be critical in U.S. House control at the national level. So we'll just have to keep an eye on that. One last thing I'll say is it's been interesting to talk with party leaders in recent months about the presidential race, because there was a time maybe over the summer where the Republicans in Minnesota felt like they had some kind of shot to make it close in Minnesota. You might remember that the last election cycle 4 years ago, the candidates and Trump was here, in the general election the general election campaign season. They made appearances here in Minnesota. I thought they could close the gap. They didn't eventually in 2020. But that talk has kind of subsided, after the Republicans were optimistic early on. You haven't really seen much activity here in Minnesota. So here at the state headquarters, the party here downtown St. Paul at the Intercontinental Hotel, still waiting for the big figures to show up from the party. So we'll keep you posted. Back to you.
All right, Danny, thank you. It was super interesting about Klobuchar affecting the down ballot and how that could affect the balance of power in the Minnesota House and Senate. So truly interesting. Appreciate it. Let's head over to Heidi Wigdahl at the GOP election night headquarters. That is in Bloomington, and it is starting to pick up there. And Heidi, are you seeing any of the congressional candidates coming in through the doors yet?
Yeah, well, you saw Lou spoke to Joe Taireb earlier today, and really that's the only candidate we've seen so far. We know that Ted Jude is expected to be here as well. I haven't personally seen him yet, but he is expected to be here tonight. And his race is one that is closely being watched by the GOP. Now, Ted Jude is up against Democrat Kelly Morrison. And this all became the case because incumbent Congressman Dean Phillips decided during his presidential run that he would not seek a fourth term, which opened up this seat, a rare seat in a purple district. Prior to Phillips, who is a Democrat, the seat was occupied by Republicans for nearly 6 decades. District 3 is made up of the suburbs northwest and south of Minneapolis. Now, a little background on Jude. He was first elected to the Minnesota legislature in 1972, making history as the youngest at age 20. He served as a Democrat for years before switching parties in the early 90s. Jude later served as a district court judge for 11 years before hitting the mandatory retirement age of 70. And in 2022, he ran for Attorney General and Hennepin County Attorney, but was unsuccessful. A big topic in this race I heard you guys talking about earlier is around abortion. Morrison's career as an OBGYN is front and center as she advocates for abortion rights. Meanwhile, Jude told our KARE 11's John Croman that he sides with the U.S. Supreme Court, that it's a state issue. But both Jude and Morrison told John Croman that they would continue in the bipartisan tradition of Phillips and the 3 Republicans who came before them. David Schultz, a political science professor at Hamline University, I spoke to him earlier, and he said that he doesn't think any other congressional seats are seriously at play. Now, there's also, you guys talked about that Senate seat that's up that could break up the DFL trifecta. We'll have more on that later tonight. And, of course, we will let you know when we hear from Ted Jude here. Back to you.
All right, Heidi, thank you so much. We have just about 16 minutes until the polls close here in Minnesota. We're going to keep our eyes on all of that. Of course, our stream continues now. We're going to take a little short break, though. Stay with us.
evening. Thanks for joining us for local coverage of Decision 2024. Polls close in under 15 minutes here in Minnesota. We have a team of reporters in the field at parties and rallies across the Metro, Mankato, Madison, Wisconsin, as well as the Harris Walls event in D.C., and the GOP and DFL headquarters here at home, as well as experts to provide analysis and commentary, including GOP analyst Brian McClung and Democratic strategist Jeff Hayden. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us tonight. Obviously a huge national story, but there's a lot at stake here in Minnesota, and we're certainly watching Wisconsin closely as well. All 8 congressional seats in Minnesota on the ballot today. There is one, though, that everyone is watching with rapt attention. That's the 2nd District, where incumbent Democrat Angie Craig is up against Republican Joe Tayrab. Let's get your thoughts first, Mr. Hayden.
Well, it is definitely a swing district. Angie Craig has kind of figured out that district. She was one of the first people to push back against Representative Omar, defund the police. She was one of the first people, along with Congressman Phillips, that said that Joe Biden maybe was not fit or ready to run. She went down to the border. She's really good on ag issues, and that district kind of has a mixture of urban and ag. So she really has figured it out. The bigger issue is, does that district kind of go for Donald Trump, and for how much, and does that push Joe Tayrab up
the ballot? You said, though, Brian, she has been a good centrist. She's worked very hard to prove her centrist reputation.
Well, Representative Angie Craig is one of the few Democrats in Congress who can legitimately claim that she is a moderate. I mean, she has worked across the aisle. She does those things. But Republicans have been very excited about Joe Tayrab as their candidate. You know, he was really the candidate that Representative Tom Emmer, who is the whip and the former head of the NRCC, pushed for. He's a former assistant U.S. attorney. He's a Marine. And so more money has gone into this congressional race than any other in Minnesota. It is clearly the one that people are focused on. It is an uphill battle for a Republican against a 2-term incumbent like Angie Craig, but it is a race that people have been focused on.
All right. Thanks so much, gentlemen. You'll be with us throughout the night. We appreciate it. And we do want to let you know that we will be streaming live on KARE 11 Plus all night long. So check in with us, watch that stream. We will be there until throughout the evening hours, but of course we'll also update you on air with local races as well. You can download KARE 11 Plus for free right now on Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and Apple TV. That's all for now on our local races. We'll send you back to the national desk and hope to see you back here in an hour. back to our live stream here on KARE 11 Plus. We know Minnesota will have at least one new representative in Congress after today's votes are counted. Dean Phillips decided not to seek a fourth term in the 3rd Congressional District and instead focused on a presidential run. Our chief political reporter John Croman looks at who is looking to replace Phillips.
And no one knew who you were 10 weeks ago.
Dean Phillips wanted to show the political world that he was serious about running for president. So serious, he decided not to seek re-election in Minnesota's 3rd Congressional District. Fast forward to Tuesday's election, a choice between Democrat Kelly Morrison and Republican Tad Jude.
I'd say the American dream is at stake. This is the first generation where our children don't have, it would seem, the same opportunities that we had when we were younger.
There are ways in which I think my particular skill set fits this moment. I'd be the first and only pro-choice OBGYN in Congress if I win.
Kelly Morrison has spent more than 20 years as an OBGYN. She was elected to the House in 2018 and moved up to the Senate in 2022.
We should not be mandating, legislating the practice of medicine.
Morrison led efforts to put abortion rights into state law after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and left that question up to the states.
To carve out this one little area of health care and say that that is something that state legislatures and governors should make decisions about really makes no sense to me. This is a human issue. It's not a state's issue. This impacts American women and girls and their entire families.
You know, I'm not going to vote for a national ban on abortion. It's a state issue. The U.S. Supreme Court said it's a state issue. I know Minnesota has settled law in that area.
Tad Jude served in the legislature from 1972 to 1989 as a Democrat. Switched parties in the early 1990s, later served as a district court judge for 11 years before hitting the mandatory retirement age. In 2022, he ran for attorney general and Hennepin County attorney, coming up short in both quests.
Together, we'll make crime illegal again.
Both candidates agree Congress must have a role in fighting inflation. For Morrison, that includes more efforts to cap prescription drug prices.
We're having an affordability challenge. People are struggling to afford their lives. So I've been focused in the state legislature on bringing down the cost of prescription drugs, which is an important part of helping people afford their lives.
For Jude, the key to lower consumer prices is avoiding large government stimulus programs like those signed by President Biden.
It's hard to get your head wrapped around that, but it's all contributing to inflation. And our children and grandchildren are going to have to pay for that somehow.
So here we go.
When the two candidates met for their only debate last month on TPT's Almanac, Jude took aim at Morrison for being part of the DFL majority in the Senate that passed the largest budget in state history.
Through the whole history of the state, we haven't had a 40% increase in the size of state government. And my opponent's vote has been part and parcel of that.
Let her defend herself.
Eric, we need a tax policy that works for all Minnesotans. What we don't need are tax cuts for billionaires and wealthy hedge funds.
We have a Minnesota where half the people aren't listened to, certainly small business people who are trying to make a living, putting food on the table for a family. They're not being listened to.
We did a lot of great things during that legislative session, including that $300 million for law enforcement, including the universal criminal background checks and extreme risk protection orders. We passed the largest middle-class tax cut.
They're both hoping that Congress revisits the bipartisan border legislation that was scuttled last year when former President Trump gave it a thumbs down.
We are a nation of immigrants. Having said that, our immigration system is broken and has been for decades because Congress has failed to act.
I support the wall. I support streamlining the asylum process so that people are properly vetted.
The 3rd District had been held by Republicans for 58 years when Dean flipped it to blue in 2018, but he continued the bipartisan tradition of the 3 Republicans who held it before him, Bill Frenzel, Jim Ramstad, and Eric Paulson. Both Jude and Morrison say they'll continue in that vein.
These are people who would on occasion challenge their own party. They were independent voices for the voters of the 3rd District who are very independent.
All of them really, I think, tried to represent everyone in the district regardless of their party affiliation. And so those are big shoes to fill. If I have the honor of serving, I would hope to continue in that tradition.
A lot of attention on Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District and the race between Angie Craig and Republican Joe Tayrab. We will get the history on that race in a moment. But first we want to go live to Jessica Hardin-Egan, where Angie Craig supporters have gathered tonight. Hey, Jessica.
Hey there, you know, this room is filling up rather quickly since the doors opened about 30 minutes ago, and you can really feel some of the excitement and enthusiasm in this room. I've been talking with people as they've been walking into this watch party, and they all tell me really similar things. They like that Angie Craig is authentic, that she can work with both Republicans and Democrats, but most importantly, they feel like she's not divisive. They feel like she doesn't drive hate, and that she's someone who truly focuses on bringing people together. I talked with one man who's never voted for Craig up until this election because he didn't like what he saw in her opponent, Joe Tairab. Now, we heard from him a little bit earlier. He talked with our Lou Groose at the GOP watch party tonight. He says he got in this race because he wanted to see a change. He loved his job as a federal prosecutor, but he saw like what we were doing in his eyes. It wasn't working. And at the heart of his campaign, he's really been pushing no more status quo. He doesn't want to see politicians continuing to do the same thing. So he got into this to shake some things up. Now, both candidates are going to be closely watching what happens in Scott County tonight. They say that county could ultimately determine who wins this election. Back to you.
All right, we'll be watching. Thank you, Jessica. For more about this race and the candidates, once again, here's John Croman.
There are people still who are undecided in this congressional race. We are finding them at the doors. I know it's stunning.
2nd District Congresswoman Angie Craig revved up campaign volunteers in Eagan as part of her final Election Day door-knocking push, while her Republican opponent, Joe Tairab, cast his vote at his local polling place in Burnsville.
I've just been honored to run in this race. I've been honored to get to know the people of the 2nd Congressional District here. During this race, I'm excited about what's going to happen tonight.
Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District extends from the southern metro suburbs into Scott, Dakota, Le Sueur, and Rice counties. That mix of rural and suburban areas makes it a highly competitive swing district.
This race really is about and has been about freedom. The freedom for a woman and her family to make their own healthcare decisions.
I ran because I love America, and I can't sit idly by while I see the American dream slipping away. And so I was just wanted to do something about it.
Tairab served as a Marine Corps attorney in Iraq, and in civilian life became a federal prosecutor who handled some of the Feeding Our Future fraud cases and Bloods gang racketeering cases.
And I think Americans are going to increasingly want to go back to the Trump economy, the Trump border, and where we were on actually supporting law enforcement. So I'm really excited about that.
Craig was an executive at St. Jude Medical before turning to politics. She unseated incumbent Jason Lewis in 2018 and fended off challenges from Marine veteran Tyler Kistner in both 2020 and 2022. She's made the news for pressing the postal system to fix delivery problems.
No one has fought harder for us than Angie Craig.
Craig's work getting public safety dollars into the district earned her the endorsement of the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association. She had a personal encounter with crime last year when she was attacked at her Washington, D.C. apartment.
He tried to pull me back into the elevator, and at that point I jumped out and started screaming for help. We've done the work, not just to win over voters, but we've done the work every single day for the people of the 2nd District.
In their head-to-head debates, Tairab has gone after Craig for supporting big-ticket federal stimulus bills that he asserts made inflation worse.
And again, we need to go back to the nexus of why we had inflation. A big reason why was because gas was poured on that inflation fire with those two massive spending bills, with the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act that Congresswoman Craig, you voted for. We cannot have that. We cannot go with the status quo on the economy.
Inflation has been a challenge. It's down to, I think, about 2.2%, but it's been a real fight. That's why I've been focused on reducing the cost of prescription drugs. I'm not going to tell 3,200 2nd District seniors that, sorry, your insulin can't be capped anymore because of the Inflation Reduction Act being repealed if Joe Tairab is ever in Congress.
All right, that is definitely one of the races we are watching tonight, and the polls have officially closed here in Minnesota. It is now 8:04. Of course, anyone who is in line can continue to vote, but the polls closed here in Wisconsin at 8 o'clock. So we're going to be watching those results coming in. The next batch of states to close their polls will be Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Utah, and Nevada, which is a crucial state that closes at 9 o'clock. When it comes to electoral votes, there are 2 time zones to really pay attention to, and the Central Time Zone is one of them. There are 163 electoral votes at stake, with polling in the final 2 districts in Texas now closed. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, also very important, and New York are also in this group of 15 states. Gentlemen, does it feel like Wisconsin gained even more importance in the last few days for the candidates?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it became a place in which, and Brian has talked about it earlier, it's part of the blue line, and it's kind of the last one in the blue line, and it became really, really, really important. I think that's why you saw, especially Governor Walz there so much.
Yeah, both candidates spending a lot of time in Wisconsin, whose polls are now closed. Let's talk for a minute about how long it's going to take to get the results from Wisconsin.
Well, it looks like Wisconsin is probably, on the slower end of the spectrum, and that's something we've been talking about throughout the night, which is it's very likely that we will not have a complete picture by the end of tonight, by early this morning. Keep in mind that 4 years ago, the Associated Press didn't call the election for Joe Biden until the Saturday after the election. So, and as you look at some of the other states, Pennsylvania has been notoriously slow.
Wasn't it Pennsylvania really that held it up?
It was Pennsylvania last time that we were waiting on. Nevada and Arizona are both pretty slow as well. So as much as we would all love to, wrap this thing up by 11 o'clock tonight and just know what has happened, that's probably not the case.
So were there rules, laws, anything that could have changed in Wisconsin or did change in Wisconsin to speed up that vote count? In Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania?
And they did. Some states did change their rules, and in part it is states that choose not to begin counting their early votes or their absentee ballots until the polls close on election night. And of course, if you're in a big state like Pennsylvania, just the process of entering those ballots into a vote counting machine is going to take a while. So Wisconsin, is in a similar position. So yes, I think it is one of those cases where you want to take a look at that. But on the other hand, ballot security and making sure that we have transparency and we have, elections that are well run and that we all can agree on and accept the results, that's ultimately more important than getting it done by 11 o'clock Central Time.
But, the other thing is that the Trump campaign, that's what all this January 6th stuff was about, the big steal and that kind of thing. So there was like a political issue there about how do you change your laws? Should you change your laws? I think we've all heard plenty of reports where people in Nevada were going in with pitchforks, going after their county election official to say that, that their voting booths weren't operating well or they weren't counting them the right way and all that kind of stuff. So I guess my point I'm making is it isn't just about there is enough technology. You could do it the right way and feel really good about it. But if the electorate is saying that they want you to count one by one by one, or they're going to come after you, then it became a political issue.
Yeah, then we have to do that. It's especially unfortunate, I guess, that this race appears like it is going to be so tight. We're going to see a lot more results coming in. We're watching them for you, by the way. We'll be showing them to you for here in Minnesota and Wisconsin as soon as they start rolling in. What is your feeling both in Wisconsin and Minnesota heading into this? What were the behind-the-scenes conversations? What's kind of the general feeling about where we'll land here in these two states?
I think Minnesota is, I think the bigger issue in Minnesota is I think they're going to vote for Vice President Harris. The bigger issue is how big of a lead will she has that has a direct relationship to those down the ballot state house races, potentially in 45 as well in the state Senate race. I think that's really the conversation is how does that the turnout for a statewide candidate, which, Vice President Harris is essentially a statewide candidate, but how does that break down in those northern suburbs? How does that break down in greater Minnesota? How does that break down in St. Cloud and in North Mankato and those places? I think in Wisconsin it's the same thing. And I don't know enough about their congressional or their state house races, but I think it's the same issue of can we get the turnout that we need to be able to kind of push Vice President Harris with a margin that's helpful.
All right. Thanks, gentlemen. We appreciate your insight tonight. We're going to head out now to DFL headquarters in St. Paul. Jennifer Hoff has been there all night, largely by herself. What kind of party is that, Hoff, if you're the only one there?
I wouldn't call it a party just yet, man. As you can see, we're still seeing just the amount of press here behind us. I will say polls closed, 8-9 minutes ago. People are slowly starting to filter in the lobby. until they start to come here to really see some of those first results start to come in. Some of the early races that we might be able to call tonight, of course, is Representative Ilhan Omar's Congressional District number 5, which of course is one of the bluest districts in the entire state, as well as Representative Michelle Fischbach's Congressional District number 7, which is all along the western side of the state and is the most red district in the entire state. We haven't talked about Michelle Fischbach's district just yet and her Democratic challenger here tonight because it is likely that she will win that race. She won that seat back in 2020 and took it from Colin Peterson, who was a Democrat and held that seat for a very long time, about 30 years. He was a very conservative Democrat. But again, she has held this seat for several years now. She did go up against Steve Boyd, which is an interesting note in the primary this summer. He still won about 35% of the vote as a relative newcomer and someone who leans even further right than she did, and that she does rather, and that surprises some experts in how that went. But as for her challenger here tonight, AJ Peters, small business owner, county board member, farmer, former teacher. He wants to provide full access to high-speed internet and affordable health care. But again, it is a race that will likely go to Fischbach tonight. Polls closing about 10 minutes ago. We are watching that race as well as Congressional District 3 you've heard us talk a lot about, as well as the state Senate race in District 45. Those are important because they may very well shift that balance of power again that you've heard us talk about, of course, and whatever happens with Walz and what that means for our governor and lieutenant governor position here tonight. So lots of stuff at stake, and certainly we'll continue to follow it all. Back to you.
All right. We do know at some point it's going to get real crowded in there tonight, Jennifer. Thanks so much. For now, we are getting some very early results in, so let's take a look. This is the race for U.S. Senate. Of course, long-term incumbent Amy Klobuchar, right now with 43% of the vote to Royce White's 54% of the vote, but that's just 1% of the precincts reporting. So let's take a look at the next page. I believe we have results for the presidential election here in Minnesota as well. With 1% reporting, take these all with a grain of salt, of course. Same precinct reporting. Kamala Harris with 31% of the vote and Donald Trump with 67%. A little too early to make anything of this, I'm assuming, gentlemen?
Yeah, don't start the party quite yet at 1% in, no.
All right, Wisconsin, here's a look at their 1% that's reporting. Again, you see Donald Trump ahead of Kamala Harris there. I don't know if we have Baldwin and Hovde as well, but that's what we have for Wisconsin right now. Again, very, very early. Polls just closed 12 minutes ago. So we're in it for the long haul here tonight, and it might be a very long haul. Let's check in now with the Republicans. Lou Raguse is with them at the Radisson Blu in Bloomington. Hey, Lou.
Hey there, guys. Yeah, so the party here at the Minnesota GOP election night headquarters is really going strong, and I've spent the last half hour or so just talking to voters. I'll tell you, they have a very positive energy here tonight, a lot of cheering when the results are shown on the big screens, and I've been talking with some of the really plugged-in party leaders, and the way that they are conveying what they're feeling tonight is comparing to 2022, when there was supposed to be that red wave that everyone was talking about, but when some of those early results were coming in, it started to become apparent that that was not going to happen. Compared to that, they say they're feeling relief tonight that so far, the early results in some of the down ballot races in those eastern states that have been announced so far have been very positive for what they're looking to. So there's a lot of positivity here at the GOP party. And right now we are joined by the Congressional District 3 GOP candidate, Tad Jude, and his wife Jackie joining us tonight. Now this is the Congressional District seat that was formerly held by Dean Phillips before he resigned and took a run for president for the Democratic Party in the primary. So Tad, tell me tonight, how are you feeling now that the voting has ended for the night?
Well, we're excited to see what the returns are. I'm optimistic, and we place all our faith in the voters, and the voters will give their verdict.
Now, we talked a little bit about the campaign, and you talked about how it involves a lot of listening when you go door to door and you're talking to voters. What are some of the things that you heard from people in your congressional district on those door knocks? What are their biggest issues? What did you really hear from them and take away from that?
The main issue I hear about is affordability. how to pay for a home or how to pay rent, how to put food on the table, how to put gas in the car, how to pay insurance. The inflation has really hit everybody, and that's what I hear about. I hear about the border a little bit, I hear about crime a little bit, but mostly I hear about affordability.
Okay, and that's an issue that obviously extends beyond just their congressional district. When the results start to come in, what sections are you really looking forward to seeing that will kind of be like a bellwether for you of how things are going?
I've represented a lot of the northern and the western end of the district, so I'm very interested in seeing how the returns come in from the northern and western end, and whether we've been able to get our message out in the eastern and the southern end. So it's kind of a big C around the western part of the metropolitan area.
All right. And Jackie, one question for you. What's the campaign been like for you? What's your biggest takeaway?
We've had a lot of fun, actually. We're a good team, and it was just such an honor to talk to all the people out in the district and find out what really matters. And Tad is such a good candidate that he will represent the district really well. And
okay, well, thanks so much, and good luck to you this evening. Thanks for joining us, Tad.
Thank you.
All right, guys, so that's it for now from the GOP Minnesota election night headquarters. As the results are coming in, we're talking with a lot of the plugged-in party folk here, the GOP faithful, so we'll have lots more interesting things to talk about as the night progresses.
All right, we'll check back. Thanks so much, Lou. Right now, we wanted to show these results. Keep in mind, this is 1% of the precincts reporting. Eric Hovde with a commanding lead, 63 to 36%. This, of course, is a race that we're watching closely, is anticipated to be a very, very tight race. Let's go over to Rena for more on that.
All right, thanks, Julie. Not only is that a tight race, Wisconsin's a swing state, so the entire state is really getting the national spotlight tonight, one of 7 crucial swing states. By the way, in 2016, Trump beat Hillary Clinton by just 23,000 votes in Wisconsin. Then in 2020, lost to President Biden by a very similar margin. Our Morgan Wolf is in Madison right now. And Morgan, what can you tell us? It feels like it's going to be a long night maybe there?
Well, Rena, we have some of these numbers coming in, and I can tell you that the counties that surround Milwaukee, I worked here previously, 2016, those counties all around Milwaukee County, they lean Republican, and that's exactly what we're seeing. It looks like Waukesha County has some of their numbers in, and they have Eric Hovde leading over Tammy Baldwin as expected, and then of course President Trump leading over Vice President Kamala Harris, which is also expected. As far as we go for where I am right now in Madison, it's going to be a long night for the folks here in Dane County. They had over 200,000 absentee ballots alone. And so with the rules that they have, the state laws, they can't be counting those ballots ahead of Election Day. Election officials, though, say that everything as far as in-person voting went very smoothly.
We had additional law enforcement out today, just in case. We had a bomb sweep of this building, so with dogs, so we knew that if we got a call, there wouldn't, we know how to react to that.
Yeah, and I am hearing that Milwaukee actually, was hearing rumblings of some of these threats, and they found that they weren't substantiated at all. Also in Milwaukee, of course, the snafu with the absentee ballots that were being counted, 30,000 absentee ballots had to be recounted, and now I am seeing reports that U.S. Senator Ron Johnson showed up to the central counting area and is asking some questions, reportedly calling it very curious about the issue that they had with the machines. So that's something that we're going to be keeping our eye on. And then, of course, the numbers, I'm going to be making sure. Oh, it looks like we're getting even more coming in right now. Okay, Dane County is getting some numbers, really small amount, just roughly it looks like 3,000, and it's showing that Kamala Harris does have a lead over Donald Trump, as expected, as I said, in Dane County, which does lean towards Democratic candidates. So I'll toss it back to you guys, and I'm going to keep looking at these numbers.
A little while, Morgan. Appreciate that. It is 8:19, and our polls just closed about 19 minutes ago, or exactly 19 minutes ago. Christopher Hrapsky has been checking in all the numbers across the country. Let's go to him now with the big board. You need some khakis, friend. You need to wear some khakis.
You just call me Christopher?
Sure.
You already brought out my full first name?
Wait till I get to the middle name, friend.
Jacket came off. Now the gloves are coming off. Race to 270, 177 Trump, 99 Kamala Harris. Here's the story right now. We knew that Trump was going to take the South here as red as he did in 2020. We know he's going to take these states. Here are the three keys we're looking at on the eastern border right now: Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. Biden won Georgia by, 12,000 votes in 2020. Right now, with 70% in, Donald Trump is up by 6 points. 6 points in Georgia. That's a big deal. We still have votes to count in Columbus and Savannah, but he has a commanding lead in Georgia right now. Harris still has a path to 270 even if she loses Georgia. Let's take a look at North Carolina right now. North Carolina was a 1% Trump win in 2020. We have 49%, 50% of the votes in. Trump has the lead there as well right now. Let's look at Pennsylvania. It's part of that blue wall we were talking about. Still early, 22%. Harris has a big lead, 17-point lead. A lot of the big cities are in there right now. What Morgan was talking about in Wisconsin, there's nothing in yet, okay? We got 3% of the votes in. Trump has a big lead on 3%. But this is interesting because we're talking about, you see that big red dot right there? That's Waukesha County. That's one of Trump's strongest counties. In fact, I'm going to show you real quick. If we stay full, just keep it full for a sec. I'll show you what it looked like in 2020. So here are the results from 2020. We're paying attention to these counties around Milwaukee. Trump had some of the most votes he's got in Milwaukee County because it's not just the city, it's Greendale, it's West Allis, it's some of these other smaller cities that voted heavily in favor of Donald Trump in 2020. Look, he got 134,000 votes in 2020 there. We're paying attention to Ozaukee. We're paying attention to Washington. We're paying attention to Waukesha. But here's something really interesting. Door County. See the thumb on Wisconsin up here? I don't know if you'd take me, you can get off of it full. You can take me for a sec. Door County is the thumb of Wisconsin, right? Right up there. Not a lot of votes in 2020. It's 19,000, almost 20,000. Door County is the only county in all 7 swing states that has correctly predicted or voted for the correct president this century. It's the only county in all those 7 swing states that has done it. And in 2020, Biden won by 250, almost 300 votes. So people, you may have seen him on 60 Minutes. Door County had a special report because of that single fact. But we're going to pay attention closely to Wisconsin. There's just not enough in Minnesota and not enough in Wisconsin right now to give us any strong details. But again, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, that's what we're watching closely right now at this hour, guys.
That Door County stat is pretty fascinating. So I know I'll be paying attention to that one. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Let's head over to Julie.
All right, joined again by Jeff Hayden and Brian McClung. We're going to talk about some of these results. This is, just 1% of the precincts reporting right now in Minnesota. Certainly not enough to make any predictions on. We've all been doing this long enough to know you got to wait, you got to be patient. Is there anything that you are seeing, Brian? Let's start with you. When you look at that national results that have come in so far, that is a bellwether for anything.
Well, I think it's really shaping up to be the race that we've been talking about this evening, which is those 7 swing states with, I think, Donald Trump winning the southern states, winning North Carolina, Georgia, and then eventually Arizona and Nevada. And then the question becomes, can Vice President Harris win all 3 of the states in the blue wall? If she does that, she wins the presidency with exactly 270 electoral votes. So the big question from my perspective comes down to Michigan and Wisconsin. Oof. I think those are going to be the 2 closest states. And if either of those 2 states goes for Donald Trump, that's the ballgame. I think Harris is the likely winner in Pennsylvania. I know it's been very close there, but it just felt like they were shoring that up. So to me, really, there's 2 states to be watching, Michigan and Wisconsin.
Do you agree with that, Jeff?
Well, he's starting to convince me that might be, maybe it's wishful thinking, but I think he might be right. I mean, I thought that the votes at this point in Georgia And in North Carolina, there was just, I mean, North Carolina, because the governor won, that was a Democrat by so much, I was hoping that, or maybe thought that would kind of push Vice President Harris there. And I thought that Atlanta, or that the Atlanta, area and the work that they did in Georgia would turn out votes, but it looks like it's not. So I do think that this blue wall that Brian is talking about, I still am holding out a little bit in Arizona, in Nevada, but I think this blue wall is really kind of Vice President Harris's last hope.
But would you say, Jeff, it's fair to say there's no big trend, there's nothing we're seeing so far when you look at the results that have come in that says, oh boy, maybe the polls got it vastly wrong and maybe this will be a sweep by one side or the other? Or is it still too early to say?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if those numbers stay good in North Carolina and Georgia, they had them much closer. So I don't, it worries me that if the pollsters were out and Donald Trump starts to win, former President Trump wins outside of the margin of error there, then what happens as you start to look across that blue wall?
Yeah, President Trump is ahead 5 percentage points in Georgia right now with about half of the vote in. And so what Senator Hayden is saying is exactly right. The pollsters had that as like a 1 or 2 point race. And if Trump ends up winning that by 5, what does that say about, on down the line in some of these other states? So that is maybe the trend to watch or to look for. But again, state to state, you can have wide variations. It's not what's happening in North Carolina and Georgia is not necessarily going to be the same thing happening in Nevada and Arizona. And in those 2 states in the Southwest, you had U.S. Senate races where the Democrats are running very strongly and are positioned to win both of those U.S. Senate races. So, can that kind of help pull Vice President Harris along in those states and rework the calculus relative to just winning the blue wall?
So if you're saying it's coming down to Wisconsin and Michigan, what were the polls looking like in Wisconsin? I know Wisconsin is incredibly tight.
Yes. I mean, closer in Michigan, really, than in Wisconsin, but also very close in Wisconsin. So, I mean, the final polls were showing probably 2 point lead for Vice President Harris in Wisconsin and more like a 1 point lead or a tie in Michigan. In those U.S. Senate races, you have really competitive U.S. Senate races in both of those states. And what I've been hearing from my friends working on those races is that Republicans are more likely to win the U.S. Senate race in Michigan than in Wisconsin. So they had thought as a result that might be the state, but you could have, the split votes in both of those two and see them go for, one for president, one for U.S. Senate.
What do you think about the Senate race in Wisconsin with Eric Hovde against the incumbent Tammy Baldwin? Do you think she's really in danger, or you think she's a pretty strong candidate that has withstood these kind of challenges before?
I think so, but I mean, I think that Brian's making some compelling argument that says that if Wisconsin really is starting to, I mean, if President Trump wins Wisconsin, I think that's good for Hovland. I mean, Senator Baldwin is fighting. She is, battle tested and true. But if for some reason you start looking in these, suburbs of Milwaukee and Madison and these places start to, resonate more with Hovland, candidate Hovland, then I think she could be in trouble.
All right, well, let's take a look at some of those results. The polls closed about 27 minutes ago. This is Wisconsin with 7% of precincts reporting. Trump ahead by 56, Kamala Harris 42. And let's take a look. Do we have the Senate race in Wisconsin? Or is that just the one board we want to look at? Again, just 7%. But there's Eric Hovde with 56% to Tammy Baldwin's 42. It's early in the night, Rena, but that's where things stand right now.
It is, in fact, early in the night, at least as far as an election night is concerned. This is a live look right now, West Palm Beach, Florida. Palm Beach, Florida. Live look inside the Trump-Vance headquarters. That's at the Palm Beach Convention Center. Not likely to see the candidates there probably anytime soon. Probably wait until it gets a little bit closer to having some more solid, even though we're not going to know tonight, some more solid evidence of which way that this might lean. Let's also head out to Washington, D.C. Lauren Lemanchek, live at Howard University. The Harris Walz campaign is gathered there tonight. There have been people filing in all night long. I know, of course, that they're excited because they're there for their candidates. What are you feeling there?
Well, Rena and Julie, you can see behind me it's empty, but that's only because that's blocked off for VIPs and security reasons. There's a huge crowd that's kind of behind the media risers, about 20,000 people here, and they're watching the results come in on the big screen. There are cheers when a state's called for Harris. There are boos when a state's called for Trump. I will say, you know, the early numbers aren't as positive in some of these states as I think the crowd here would hope for. I have heard from Tim Walz's press people who say that he is still back in his hotel. He is watching the results come in with his family, with Gwen and Hope and Gus and other extended family. So they're watching those back there, as is typical for a candidate on a night like this. He and Kamala Harris will come here to address the crowd when more is known later in the night. Here's what we can tell you so far from the Harris-Walz campaign. Early in the night, they were pointing to strong turnout in college towns. In fact, they pointed to 7-hour lines at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. That's a state, obviously, they need to win. And we're told in Pennsylvania they're trying to possibly even extend the time there just to give some of these people a chance to vote. But that's what they have been leaning into, the big turnout in college towns, and they say a good turnout in Philadelphia, as well as good turnout in the heavily Puerto Rican areas of Philadelphia, where they think they'll do very strongly. We haven't gotten any updates from the campaign in quite a while at this point. I suspect they are watching polls coming in and crunching their own numbers, just as we are back at the station watching these results come in. We've had a number of musical acts perform from Howard University here. I just heard some cheering. Nope, nothing's going on behind me, just hearing cheering because of a new result over on the big screen there. But other than that, we're just kind of here waiting. Again, we've been keeping tabs on Tim Walz, Governor Walz, and we're told that tonight he is just feeling incredibly grateful. Julie and Rena?
Well, at least it looks decently warm there, Lauren. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Control of the United States Senate up for grabs tonight. Right now, Democrats hold a narrow majority. There are 34 Senate seats up for election this cycle, and polls suggest that 8 of them could go either way. Majority control of the Senate gives that party the ability to do a lot of things, confirm or block judges and cabinet appointees. They can also run committees, which can hold hearings and then order people to testify or provide documents, and then pick which bills are brought to the floor for a vote. Now, control of the Minnesota Senate also up for grabs this election, despite only one race on the ballot. It's a special election. It is Senate District 45. They're holding the special election to fill the vacancy that was left by Senator Kelly Morrison, who, of course, resigned to run for Congress in Minnesota's 3rd District, which is Dean Phillips's old seat. Republican Kathleen Folk and Democrat Ann Johnson Stewart are vying for that seat. But at 8:31, we simply just don't have enough of the numbers in yet to give you any results on that one. But our chief political reporter, John Croman, does give us an in-depth look at the makeup of the legislature and what all of this means for the balance of power after this election.
So the landscape for this election? Well, the governor's office will remain in the blue camp, regardless of what happens in this election. But the House and Senate are up for grabs, and presidential polling is no predictor.
There is a long-standing tradition in America and Minnesota of people splitting their ticket. They might vote for, let's say, Harris for president, and then turn around and vote for a Republican for the Minnesota House.
In the House, Democrats had a 70 to 64 seat majority the past 2 years. Republicans only need to flip 4 seats to gain a 68 to 66 majority. If Republicans pick up 3 seats, we end up with a 67 to 67 even split, which would require a power sharing arrangement, which is what happened here in 1979.
One of the big puzzles in Minnesota is that we keep seeing Democrats winning statewide races, while Republicans have done very well in the legislative races. And the answer to that puzzle is that Republicans are distributed more evenly in the state.
All 134 House seats are on the ballot Tuesday, but there are 15 matchups we're watching most closely. District 3B near Duluth, incumbent Republican Natalie Delesnikar versus Democrat Mark Munker. District 7B in the Iron Range, Democrat Lori Janatopoulos faces Carl Warwas in an open seat created by the retirement of Dave Lislegard. District 14A in St. Cloud, incumbent Republican Bernie Perriman is being challenged by Democrat Abdi Desani. District 14B next door, incumbent Democrat Dan Wolgamott faces a challenge from Sue Eck. District 18A in southern Minnesota, incumbent Democrat Jeff Brandt is being challenged by Republican Erica Schwartz. News. District 26A in Winona, Democrat Sarah Kruger is going up against Republican Aaron Rapinski for a seat left open by the retirement of Gene Pawlowski. Here in the Twin Cities Metro, even more swing districts in play. 32B in Blaine, incumbent Democrat Matt Norris is being challenged by Republican Alex Moe. District 35A in Anoka, it's incumbent Democrat Zach Stevenson against Republican Josh Jungling. District 35B in Coon Rapids, Democrat Carrie Rayrauer is taking on Republican Steve Pape in an open seat caused by the retirement of Democrat Jerry Newton. District 36A in Lino Lakes, Republican incumbent Elliot Ingen faces a challenge from Democrat Janelle Calhoun. District 41A in Lake Elmo, Democrat Lucia Robleski is running against Republican Wayne Johnson for an open seat caused by the retirement of GOP Rep. Mark Weems. District 41B in Hastings, Democrat Jen Fox faces Republican Tom Dipple in a race for an open seat caused by Republican Shane Hudella's retirement. District 48B in Chaska, Democrat incumbent Lucy Rame is being challenged by Republican Caleb Steffenhagen. District 54A in Shakopee, incumbent Democrat Brad Tapke facing Republican challenger Aaron Paul. And in Lakeville's District 57B, Democrat Brian Cohen is taking on incumbent Republican Jeff Whitty. Over in the Senate, 66 of 67 seats are not in play this year because senators are in the middle of four-year terms. But right now, that body is split 33 to 33 because Democrat Kelly Morrison resigned to run for Congress. So control of the Senate will be decided by a special election for Morrison's seat in Senate District 45, a race that pits Democrat Ann Johnson Stewart against Republican Kathleen Folk.
We need to find ways to make sure the families can afford their life here, and hopefully their grandparents stay here too and they don't move to another state as well.
Folk is a realtor who is campaigning on the idea of restoring balance to state government. Stewart is a civil engineer and former state senator.
Having served in the Senate, I realized how to be effective, and I worked with some other colleagues to form the Infrastructure Alliance.
SD 45 takes in all of the cities around Lake Minnetonka and parts of western Edina. It has been held by both Democrats and Republicans in the past, making it a true swing district.
All right, here are the results we have so far. You can see it's just 1% reporting right now in Minnesota, so really nothing to talk about as far as results coming in yet. It's only 8:35. We know that the polls just closed a little more than a half hour ago. In Wisconsin, we've got 20% reporting, and you see Kamala Harris up 2 percentage points from Donald Trump. Mean anything, gentlemen?
Well, I mean, that's roughly where the polls had it, so maybe that could be an early indicator. But again, you don't know which precincts we're looking at when we just see these aggregate numbers coming in.
All right, and we know with 1%, we're expecting Royce White is not going to be putting up much of a fight in the long run against incumbent Amy Klobuchar, who has historically done incredibly well here in Minnesota. So we could run through these districts and reporting, but if we just have 1%, maybe let's just chat a little bit about what we're seeing as far as the state house and what we're expecting. You know, having a trifecta as we did for a couple of years was, bless you, sir. We're asking you to do a lot. You take water whenever you need it.
It always has at the wrong time. You got to call, yeah.
But there was that trifecta, which was very impactful. A lot of changes were made in Minnesota because the Democrats had control of the House, Senate, and the governorship. So this is a big deal for both parties if one of the House chambers flips.
Well, and more often than not in Minnesota, we have divided government. So there was one other 2-year period during Mark Dayton's time when there was a DFL trifecta in 2011 and 2012. And other than that, all the way back into the Rudy Perpich era, we had split government. And so mostly Minnesotans, I think, appreciate divided government because it forces everybody to come to the table, sort things out, even when it's messy, even when you have near government shutdowns or you go over the end of session. People just have to find a way to satisfy both sides. And so that is what in that state Senate special election, that's really what Kathleen Folk was running on saying we need to restore some balance to Minnesota state government. We've had these 2 years. We had an $18 billion surplus. Democrats spent all of it. They raised taxes on top of that. And you can't let them do this for another 2 years. It's going to make Minnesota uncompetitive. So that's a lot of what Republicans running for the state legislature have been out there saying. You need to have Republicans in control of at least one part of state government so we can moderate this and make sure the state doesn't go too far over.
So that District 45 is going to be closely watched. Right now, the Senate is divided 33-33. That one seat could make a big difference.
Makes all the difference in the world.
But you are pretty confident the Democrats are going to take that seat.
I'm pretty confident. When you look at where it's been trending, and it's the western suburbs, Lake Minnetonka area, it has been growing and growing. More and more Democrat. I think that I have a couple of friends that used to be in the state Senate, I won't say, that kind of saw that, and that's why they didn't run, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that because of those reasons, and especially because Senator Morrison, former Senator Morrison, who I think is on her way to Congress, was from that district, understood the district, and I think that she reflects like who they are. Once again, I'll mention she is a practicing OBGYN, and so she really understands, and I think is widely respected as a national leader on women's reproductive health rights, which was a kind of a key issue of why we had the trifecta. And that's the thing, is like we sat here a couple of years ago, and I personally didn't think that would happen.
Right.
And
there was a lot of surprise that night.
Yeah, when they did the after kind of look at it, that issue of women's reproductive health, which kind of tangentially is not just about women, it's about rights that people have fought for, African Americans, people in the disability community. I think people see that, and that's the reason why they vote for the Democrat. Now, to Brian's point, Democrats went in and said, hey, there's a lot of work to be done, and that we're going to do it. I was in the last trifecta, and there were a lot of things that we kind of said, well, maybe we shouldn't go that far. It was a different group of people. Between things that were left over and a very young and diverse group of folks over there, and they came there, if I might say, Gen X, Zs, millennials, who have come and said that they're not here to think about their reelection. They're coming here to get things done.
And they did.
And they went and they got things done. and things like, like feeding kids, that's a big deal. It cost a lot of money to do free lunch.
More than they thought.
Yeah, more than they thought. because everybody decided to get in on it.
Yeah.
Paid family leave, making sure that people have the opportunity to take care of their loved ones, to take care of themselves. That's really important in that next generation, right?
Yeah,
These things are kind of value propositions that they went out to Minnesotans and said, we believe that this is the right thing. And so we'll see in this election if they were right.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Let's go over to Rena. Hey, Rena.
All right, thank you, Julie. All the races that you guys have been talking about, we've got reporters all over the cities tonight covering those, and we want to check in on some of those local election night parties right now. Danny Spiewak is live at the Intercontinental in St. Paul. It's the DFL election night party, and I will have to tell you, Danny, so far, you guys have been the most lively. We haven't seen as many people at the GOP headquarters.
Well, I can report now the DJ has started blasting some music, so that's kind of a game changer. You do see people finally coming into the ballroom, almost like a wedding, when the cocktail hour ends and finally the dancing starts. So there is some more activity, but in all seriousness, we are in the next half hour, we're going to be expecting some of the bigger power players in the DFL to show up. We know Senator Amy Klobuchar is going to be here at some point. DFL Chair Ken Martin was here earlier. So that'll give us more of an inkling into the mood and how they're feeling as the night progresses. I'm just going to briefly, though, touch on the presidential race in Minnesota because we finally have some poll results coming in. Not a lot, just a couple thousand votes here or there. And Minnesota at one point in the summer was sort of talked about almost like a battleground state, maybe not lumped in with the others, but I talked to party leaders from both the GOP and the DFL who told me they felt like this was going to be a close race. Well, in the last probably 6 to 8 weeks, you haven't seen a lot of campaigning from either side, and Minnesota has kind of dropped up that battleground map. But it'll be very interesting to see what effect Governor Walz on the ticket has on the presidential results here in Minnesota. Even if Harris is favored, it'll be interesting to see what the margin looks like. So we'll keep you posted here as more folks start to come into the Intercontinental Hotel in downtown St. Paul. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Danny. Let's head over to Heidi Wendell at the GOP election night headquarters. It is picking up, and you are starting to see some people filter in there now.
Yeah, that's correct, Rita. Take a look behind me. This is the crowd here at the Radisson Blu at Mall of America. You can see it's pretty packed. I spoke to some Trump supporters who told me right now they are cautiously optimistic. Every once in a while, there'll be a burst of cheers out in the crowd. And one supporter I spoke to said he was at the election night party in 2016, and he says, in his opinion, it's much busier this time around. Now, I want to talk a little about you hear more cheers right now there. I want to talk a little bit about the Republican incumbents feeling confident about holding their congressional seats. In Minnesota's congressional races in District 1, which is the southern half of the state, it's between GOP incumbent Brad Finstad and DFL challenger Rachel Bowman. Finstad is seeking a second two-year term in Congress. He won a special election in August 2022 to serve the remainder of late Republican Congressman Jim Hagedorn's term. He then easily won again a few months later in the general election. Now, another race going on is GOP incumbent Tom Emmer. He's up against Gene Hendricks in District 6, and this is a repeat match between the two. Hendricks lost to Emmer in 2022, where Emmer took 62% of the vote, and he is now seeking a fifth term. Meanwhile, in western Minnesota 7th District, GOP incumbent Michelle Fischbach is taking on A. John Peters, and she was first elected to Congress in 2020. And despite being the incumbent, Fischbach actually did not receive the District Republican Party's endorsement at the nomination convention, but she easily won the 2022 election, where she got 67% of the vote. Lastly, in Congressional District 8, GOP incumbent Pete Staubers up against Jennifer Schultz, and representing, first elected to Congress to represent the Northern District in 2018, and he is seeking a fourth term. Back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Heidi. We appreciate it. We're going to go to some election results now and scroll through those as they start to come in. We're going to be back in just a matter of minutes with live analysis, more live reports from all the election night parties. Stick with us.